Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Woody Taylor, and just as a follow-up to some of the events you all have been having lately, we wanted to do something wilderness themed. So we're going to talk a little bit about generative AI tools and how you might use them for a wilderness trip. So we'll go through a couple of things today. First thing I'll do is just talk a little bit about myself, the destination we're going to, as well as the tool we'll use. We'll also talk about how to talk to a tool. I'll talk a little bit about a concept called prompt engineering that you use to really get great results out of these AI tools that are available today. And finally, I'll do lots of demonstrations. We'll build a trip project plan. We'll investigate a lot of fun stuff and come up with a document that we can use for our camping trip, as well as a lot of other activities within it. This presentation is designed as a first step for everybody, so feel free to ask any question you want. I'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions after. So you can submit questions at any time, and a moderator will take a look at it and submit it to me. And this presentation is part of a series. I started off with you all in August, just talking about generative AI in general and how these tools are shaping our world. This time I'm talking about the wilderness. But next time I'll talk about how to use AI within the classroom, either from a teacher or student perspective. We'll talk about how to use AI to build mindfulness and language fluency, as well as academic research and making hobbies more rewarding. So all these sessions use free tools that are available in Russia. There's no technical skills required. And really the goal here is just to build a basic concept of what I call AI literacy, which is the ability to use these tools in a cogent way within your work and your life, as well as build out your language skills with English and translating over from Russian. But let's step back and let's use AI for a wilderness adventure. And the first thing we need to do is to figure out where we're going to go. And I thought that given that I have not traveled in Russia very much and that this is a wilderness trip, it might be speculative for me to guess at places to go. But I do know that you all like going to Karelia, and there happens to be a place in the United States that's a lot like it. So what I thought I would do today is introduce you to a place in the United States that's a lot like wonderful wilderness areas in Russia, and I'll show you where that is. So first off, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, that's a map of the continental United States, and there's a red state that's noted up there called Minnesota. Minnesota, if you look at that white dot, that's actually where I live. My name is Woody Taylor. I'm a management consultant in the United States, and I spend a lot of time talking to audiences about using AI tools. I'm really excited about them. I think they can be really transformative for just about anybody. So I do that work from Minneapolis. Now that yellow star that you see is what's called the Boundary Waters Canoe area. Okay, it's a very famous area in Minnesota that is completely undeveloped. It's about 405,000 hectares, and it's completely, like I said, undeveloped, no residents, but it's also famous for what's called portaging. Now, portaging is when you go on a camping trip and you carry a canoe with you. There's lots of lakes and creeks within the Boundary Waters, about 2,000 kilometers of canoe routes. But portaging is basically carrying the canoe throughout the trip, using it when you can, but then carrying it amongst yourselves when you can't. But it's a relatively famous activity here in the United States. It certainly is something that would be done in Karelia as well. So as we talk today, I'll talk about the Boundary Waters Canoe area, or Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness, based in the United States. And it's a lot like Karelia. Like I said, we've got bears, we've got wolves, we've got mosquitoes, we've certainly got canoes. If you look at some of the statistics there, the Boundary Waters is slightly colder and slightly hotter than Karelia. It varies quite a bit during the months, and in the summer it can actually get pretty hot up there. About the same amount of snowfall and rainfall. Obviously, Karelia is bigger than an undeveloped preserve, but the climate, the trees, and the animals, much the same. So the travel planner we create might be targeted towards the Boundary Waters, but you certainly be able to create something that's more bespoke for your needs in Russia. So the primary tool we're going to use in this series, although I will introduce another, AI. Now, this is available in Russia. It's free and safe to use. The underlying architecture there is based on ChatGPT, which is a term you've probably heard. If you followed anything about AI, ChatGPT is from a company called OpenAI. They released it last November, and it's just a really strong tool at figuring out what somebody wants to know and relating the appropriate information back. Now, Perplexity is a really great tool, okay? If you're not using it yet, and I wouldn't blame you if you weren't, but if you're not using it yet, what I would recommend is that you stop using Google or another search engine and try to use Perplexity. It works with Russian as well as English. And there's a great iOS app that I think is available in Russia. I'm not sure, but I think it's out there. If it is there, please download it because it's great. But Perplexity is just a nice tool. We can just, let me show it to you real quick. Whoops. So if you go to Perplexity AI, you're going to see this kind of home screen. There's a place to discover what other people are asking about, the Northern Lights, super blue moon, alien corpses in Mexico. There's all kinds of discussions going on. But really what we want to do is just go to this page and just start asking questions. And let's go ahead and ask something like the following. Bear with me. So what kind of birds might I see in the Boundary Waters Canoe area? Question you might also ask for Corellia. I'm going to enter this prompt in, and this is a prompt. This is a request for action, and I'm going to hit go. And as you can see, while you might Google birds I might see in the Boundary Waters Canoe area, if you had Googled that, let's see, birds in the BWCA, I would get a lot of different kinds of results. I would get a list of things, but I get a lot of different links to go through. The really nice thing about Perplexity is that it gives you links, and then it gives you an answer that the AI tool has generated. So it's got a list of these, it's got a list of links. And as I scroll down, it's got nice pictures, as well as incremental questions I might ask. So what's the best time of the year to go bird watching? I could always just expand that. And it'll derive it through. So Perplexity is really cool just to ask real simple questions. And let's ask another one real quick. And this time I'm going to ask what YouTube videos might teach me portaging. Again, I'm going to try to learn how to use a canoe, and there's a technique for paddling there that's really important. And Perplexity has this really cool focus feature. If I click on this, you'll see that I can search for a variety of different things to focus stuff down a little bit better. And in this case, I'm just going to select, I just want it to search on YouTube, and I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see all kinds of links coming up specifically for portaging, as well as a summary is what's in each video. As you can imagine, that's a lot easier than picking around in YouTube. And as I scroll down, it'll continue to say, well, what more do you want to know? What gear do I need for portaging? It'll give you a list of those things. So again, Perplexity is designed to give you answers to questions that you have by looking at the context for the kind of questions you're asking. And it relates that stuff very quickly. It's a really, really powerful tool. One of the nice things about Perplexity is that it also, let me check my, sorry, I got a ping. There we go. Is that it also speaks Russian. So I can enter in, how do I protect myself from a bear attack? And I can enter that in Russian. And you'll see that it relates these in English, but I can always ask it to translate. And I apologize. Let's see, translate to Russian. There we go. So you can have an interaction with these tools in a lot of different languages. You can paste in code to debug. If you're a programmer, you can do a lot of different things with Perplexity. Basically, it's only limited by your imagination and your willingness to try. So like I said, first step is stop using the search engine. Try to use Perplexity a little bit. It really is a powerful tool, and it's replaced all the different search engines that I previously used to find results on the internet. So let's go to the next part here. Let's step back for just a second and talk a little bit how these tools work. I won't overwhelm you, and we will get back to our wilderness trip. But for right now, it might be helpful to understand just how these tools can produce so much information. So when I talk about these tools, I'm really talking about generative AI. And generative AI does all kinds of stuff. It takes natural language, either as a text input, it'll relate text outputs like you just saw. There's tools that will take video or audio and relate it to text output. You saw that with how Perplexity returns YouTube results, where it summarizes what's happening in there. And also text input to image and video output. There's some really powerful tools out there. And while they're not a part of the series, you certainly can check out things like Stable Diffusion and other tools where you can just type, show me a picture of somebody canoeing through the wilderness, and it'll produce that kind of picture. So basically, generative AI is just really smart at understanding what we want and relating that back. And it's best to think of it as just a very powerful assistant that's free and that's sitting right there for you to use. And you've been using this stuff for years, so don't let it frustrate you. If you've ever sent a text on your phone and you've said something like, I will be there in 5, and you're about to type minutes, but you'll notice that predictive text starts to appear within your chat window. You start typing, I will be there in 5. Now your phone, and it doesn't matter which phone it is, if it's got autocorrect that's doing, or autopredict that's doing these kinds of things, it's looking at your conversation history, what kind of language styles and interaction you have with those users, and everything else to really try to figure out what could be the next word that this person wants to say. Now, the phone predicts those likely words, and it could be, I will be there in 5 to do something, or I will be there in 5 hours, but it usually puts the thing that it thinks is most probable right in the middle. And in this case, it's what I wanted to type. I will be there in 5 minutes. So these AI tools are already on your phone, already in lots of different things, and basically just work on probabilities to figure out what is the next word. And it does this word by word. It's pretty fascinating. Now, this generative AI process, this is kind of a complex slide, but we'll walk through it and just focus on the overall output here. The first thing we do is initiate a prompt. Now, a prompt is a request for action. You saw me just do it in Perplexity AI when I asked about birds or defending against bear attacks or anything else. You enter in these prompts to interact with these tools. And with Perplexity, it can be as simple as a question. Tell me about Corellia, or tell me about the wilderness and outfitters. Now, when you enter a prompt, that AI tool looks at what you're asking, and if you've been talking to it, what you were talking about before. It takes that question, it breaks it into what are called tokens, and then it kicks it into a process where it compares it against all the different things it's been trained on. And a tool like Perplexity has been trained on billions of different writing samples. And what it will do is go in and try to figure out, based on how you've constructed your prompt and what's in it, what you might want to hear back. Now, the interesting thing is nobody's quite sure how these transformer models or transformer tools work, but they work pretty well because you enter in a question and then that AI starts responding, but it starts responding one word at a time. As you can see in that response there, when it says, when developing a garden schedule, it's important to consider the following things. It's building those one at a time. What is the percent that when could happen? What is the percent chance that developing could happen? And it strings that all together. It's a ton of math. But at the end of the day, what you need to remember is that the tool's really good at understanding what you want to know and relating information back to you. Let's see. Oops. So you really can make this tool and the other tools that we'll talk about in the series part of your world, whether it's learning languages or reviewing documents or exploring the world, analyzing data. These tools are extremely strong at doing all of this stuff. In a lot of ways, they're better at us for things like generating ideas. It'll make a list of a bunch of different ideas for you. Actually, I can show you that right now. Let's try a new thread. And generate a list of potential places I could go camping within 5 hours of Minneapolis. And it's just going to start rattling stuff off. It's going to give me links again to those places, that list, and it's also going to give me additional prompts to consider. Okay, so again, it will generate ideas very quickly. It'll structure language very quickly, and you'll see some of that in just a few minutes. So start using these tools. They do all kinds of fun stuff. But let's build a vacation planner for our trip here, okay? If you're new to portaging, if you're new to camping, if you don't know where you're going, a lot of times what you need is a very holistic list of stuff to prepare, how to get to the place you're going, things to consider while you're out there, like safety and things like that. Now, to do that, we're going to ask Perplexity, but we're going to ask it in a very specific way, okay? So follow me on this journey real quick. Now, when you're designing a travel plan for a trip, you know what you want to experience. You want to have your feet kicked up in a canoe and just enjoying the day. But to get there, there's a lot of different things to consider. What are you going to eat? What are you going to drink? How are you going to get permits? Permits are basically tags or licenses you can get to explore the boundary waters. What kind of routes are you going to plan, and things like clothing and gear. And if you've ever been camping before, you know that there's a lot of different questions that you might ask about all that. So we got all this stuff to figure out that's keeping us from getting to that lake. So we're going to use generative AI to help us plan this trip. Now, so we're going to create a really interesting prompt to build a trip planner, okay? But let's step back for just a second. All right. A lot of times with these tools, you have to think about the fact that they don't really know where you're coming from. Okay. You might meet a friend who's got some awareness of things and ask them for advice. But in general, you're telling them the kind of advice that you need to hear. So let's say we're about to take a trip. We don't know what to do, but we know we have a friend who knows a lot about camping. So we make an appointment to meet with them, and we grab our cup of coffee and sit down. Now, if the first thing you asked your friend was, what should I pack for my trip? Think about all the different questions that they might ask. Where are you going? Who's going with you? What do you want to do? When are you going? They're going to ask a lot of different questions. And you usually wouldn't start off just by saying something like, what should I pack for my trip? You're going to sit down with them and you're going to say things like, thanks for meeting with me. I really needed to talk to an expert camper. And then you might say things like, remember how I told you I was planning a trip for Corellia? We really want to see birds in canoes as much as possible, or use canoes as much as possible. See birds in canoe. Sorry, it's a typo on my part. But we want to see birds. We want to learn how to canoe. And then we ask, what should I pack for my trip? Now, what we just did there with our friend is that we gave them a lot of context for what we were trying to do. And we're only doing that so our friend can give us a better answer. Now, AI tools and this prompt that we're going to build work the same way. They need a lot of context to give you a really thorough answer. So we talk to an AI tool the same way we'd speak to a friend. And I'm going to introduce just a couple of acronyms or a couple of important terms here. You'll see it in just a second. So remember, we said, thanks for meeting with me. For an AI tool, you give it a job. You give the tool a role to play so it understands how to respond. And in this case, you'll see on the next slide, we're going to say, you are an expert camper. And by doing that with an AI tool, by starting off just by giving it a role, it's going to take that extremely large training, that data that it's been trained on, and it's going to be able to narrow that down to give you more precise and accurate answers. Now let's continue to extend this. Remember how I told you I was planning a trip to the boundary waters? We give the tool an objective. So play a role and then tell the tool the situation you're in. Really want to see birds. There's that typo again. I want to see birds and we want a canoe as much as possible. I guess it kind of works. You're offering context to the tool, giving it additional information. Okay, just like you would with your friend, you're explaining what's going on. So you finally get to that question, what should I pack for my trip? So in each case with this prompt, we're going to give this question that we're going to ask Perplexity a role, an objective, context, and a request that we want it to perform. Now, there's lots of different ways to do this within these tools. There's lots of different structures. If you search the web, if you search for prompt engineering, you'll see a lot of different formats. But in general, this is the simple one that I like to show audiences because it kind of makes sense without being too off-putting or too technical. So let's see what a prompt looks like. Now, here we go. I've written out a prompt for us, and I've said, you are an expert in camping, portaging, and planning camping trips. And I'm going to enter it in just that way. I like telling these tools that they're an expert because, quite frankly, and literally what it will do, it's already narrowed down that training world to this notion of camping and being an expert camper. If I had not said expert, it would also be looking at potentially bad advice or advice that came from people that didn't know much about camping about what to do. So by using little word changes like that, by saying, hey, you're an expert, these tools tend to work a lot more precisely. I've also given an objective. You're assisting me with the various planning activities relative to my trip. And then I'm going to give it context. I'm going to tell it about participants, about when I'm going, special considerations, constraints. I can type in anything I want there, really just to give the tool as much information as we can. And then finally, I'm going to give it a request. Let's generate a comprehensive yet concise plan, all right? And it's going to be full of things like what to shop for, how to get there, what routes to pick, all kinds of things. And there's another little word that I'm going to introduce, or another term that I'm going to introduce here that I'm going to ask it. I'm going to ask the tool to take things step by step. Now, it's really interesting when you ask somebody to do that, think about what they do. They will break down activities step by step and make sure they've completed one before going on to the other. That's the same logic the AI tool uses. So by asking it to be an expert, as well as telling it to take things step by step, it's much more methodological, more methods-based than it otherwise would be. Now, just some tips when you're entering in a big like this. I added some section breaks for clarity. It will look at things like those hashtags and white spaces and try to figure out a structure from that. Now, this is a structured prompt, and you certainly don't have to do that. We could have gone into Perplexity and just said something like, plan my camping trip, and it would give you a list. But the really cool thing about these tools is that you can make them very precise using structured prompts. And to do this, we're going to use a really cool function that Perplexity has, and that's called its Copilot. When we turn on this Copilot feature, you'll see it in just a second, it's going to use an even more powerful AI tool than ChatGPT. It's going to use GPT-4, which is the most recent model. And it's really hard to access this in Russia. So if you have a chance to use GPT-4, I strongly recommend it. So we're going to use Copilot to create this. And let's go ahead, and I better grab the prompt first. Whoops. Let me grab all this. We're going to paste this all in. Let's go over to our browser. And I'm going to start a new thread. And I want you to watch what I do. I'm going to enter in that entire prompt. So that entire information, and we could change things too. We could add things like, oh, sorry. Let me do that again. We could change things and add things like, let's see, interests, photography, and mammals. So we want to see things like wolves, bears, things like that on our trip. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go down and select this writing focus. Now, this writing focus won't access the internet. It'll be entirely reliant on ChatGPT-4, which is a really strong engine, to look at this prompt, pull all the information it already knows, and develop a trip planner for us. So to turn on GPT-4, you go over here to this Copilot and you turn this on. Now, I didn't tell you up front, I don't have any relationship with Perplexity whatsoever. It's just the strongest tool that I think is commonly available in Russia, so I use it. Perplexity does have a subscription plan. When you use GPT-4, you're only able to use it about 5 times a day for free, so you need to be really mindful when you use it. You can also subscribe to it and get access to a lot more questions you can ask, 600 or so in the case of this Pro subscription, as well as some other functionality increases. But for right now, you can certainly use this for free. So I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to hit enter. You're going to see a lot of words pop up. First thing it's going to ask, to make it even more precise, it's going to ask me, what's the starting location for my trip? So I'm going to say Minneapolis, Minnesota. Probably going to ask me a couple more questions. Start date and end date. I'll say 6/1, 2023, 4, start. I'll continue. Let me check my time here real quick. 10:25. What is your estimated budget for the trip? Well, that's kind of interesting. I'll go ahead and put in, well, I'm going to skip that one. I have no idea. We can ask it what the estimated budget can be after we're done. But look at what it started to do. It started to build a trip plan for me, and you're going to be impressed with how much information is there. It's going to say, it's going to give me an overview, which basically is restating a lot of the prompt that I gave it. It's going to give me a pre-trip preparation list of what I need to consider for food, camping gear, and so forth. It's going to tell me how to get to my destination, what routes I should take once I'm there. And then it's actually going to suggest a daily itinerary, okay? And you can see this is very specific. This is not just day 1 bird watching, day 2 canoe. This is giving me where to paddle, where to walk, portage if necessary, and different things to do that is built within this day. So it's already anticipating travel time, stuff like that, and giving me a really rich look at activities that I could pursue. It's also going to give me safety precautions, what to do after my trip. But here's what we're going to do with this. We're going to copy this for right now. I'm going to go into just a Word document, and I'm going to paste all this. And as you can see, let's see, it is giving me about 3 pages worth of a high-level general itinerary that we can start to build out, okay? And it did all that just with that prompt. It gave us this level of specificity, so pretty cool. But now we've got a document that we can use for our trip, and we can also do things like translate this to Russian. Your last response. Your last response. Let's see if it gets held up here. Tell you what, I'm going to copy it again. I'm just going to start a new thread. Translate following to Russian. And I pasted in that entire page. Ah, shucks. I'm sorry, gang. I should have turned that off. Let's see if it's going to get stuck here. And I apologize if it is. Apologize. I'm not sure why it's getting stuck right now. Tell you what, we'll come back to it in just a second because we're going to go back to this document. And this is something that you could review and groom. I'm going to save it for right now, and I'm going to save it as a PDF, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Use this one. I'll select PDF there and save. And hopefully we can find it. All right, so let's go back to our trip. Again, we can convert this over to Russian if we wanted. I'm not quite sure why it's not, but let me try to reset this real quick. I want to make sure it didn't get messed up. My connection isn't bad. So we use this really thorough prompt to give us a pretty interesting itinerary that we can go in and change, that we can ask it to critique and comment on, to give us more ideas. And ultimately, what we want to do with this, let me put this back on presentation mode again, is use that trip planner in GPT-4 to build a really holistic document. So we could start adding to it real quick. We could do things like, let me put this in there. And I think this is, what is the history of the boundary waters in Minnesota? And since I asked it in Russian, it's going to respond in Russian, which I think is pretty cool. And in general, these language skills should be pretty good, particularly with Copilot. They generally are better than things like Google Translate. So you might also consider using these tools for translation, or just checking on just some of the English skills and studying that you're doing. But it's going to keep on going for a while, so we'll come back to that. So when we built this trip planner, think about what you'll do on your trip. Where's it going to be? What things do you want to do? What kind of information? Build that into a prompt. You get all these thoughts down in a prompt that gives the AI tool a role, an objective, lots of context, and a request. And then we paste that prompt into Perplexity, and we selected the writing mode to turn on that Copilot to give us a really informative and interesting breakdown of what we might do. But now look at this fourth step. We copied the output into a word processing document, and we saved it as a PDF. Because another cool feature that Perplexity has is that you can upload PDFs and text to it, and you can ask questions about that document. And let me give you an example of this. This is pretty cool. Assuming I make it work right. So I searched the web just for PDFs about the boundary waters, and I found this really big guide that the Department of Fish and Wildlife in Minnesota put out. And this has got a lot of information. In a way, it's a lot like that trip planner, just with more detail. But it's a pretty big document, and it's a pretty big document in English. So what I want to do is to show you how we can use Perplexity to summarize this document, and also even just ask questions of it. Let's try that now. So I'm going to go to a new doc. I'm going to turn off Copilot right now because I think that's part of my problem there. And I'm going to grab that PDF. And I'm going to say, summarize the following document in Russian. Oh, it didn't do it. Let's see. I must have not typed it incorrectly. Oh, you turkey. Might have to ask a question in Russian. Let's, what's Russian for summarize the following document? Okay, so we've got that. And I copy that. And now let's start a new thread again. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down and click on this file button. And this will accept any kind of PDF as well as text files. And a lot of times coders will use their little notepad to track a lot of notes. You can also just use a text document. It will not take Word documents. So you do have to save it as a PDF or as a text file for right now. But I'm going to put this in there. I can put in multiple documents if I wanted to compare them. If you're a person with interest in finance, you can take things like annual company reports and upload them and ask questions of the document. It's super cool. Make sure that's on. So I've uploaded this document, and one of the questions that I have for it is to summarize it in Russian. see if it does it this time. Still didn't do it. I think it has something to do with the PDF being in English. That's interesting. I should have tested this beforehand. But I certainly can take the outputs that it's presenting right now, and it's giving, as you can see, a summary of that 16-page PDF right away, okay? And I could certainly copy this into the doc if I wanted to translate it back to Russian. It's interesting. It gives me prompts in Russian. So that's the issue. It's trying to respond in Russian, but it's getting thrown by the PDF. These tools are kind of interesting that way. Okay. So if I wanted to ask deeper questions about your, I want to know about that, not to get sick. I certainly could. I could ask things like, are pets allowed at the document? And it'll tell me exactly what I can do with a dog. I probably wouldn't take a cat or a bird there. Exactly what to do with a dog, where to dispose of waste, and in general, just making sure that I understand that this is a wildlife preserve. Don't let the dog mess everything up. But it's pulling all that from the document, which is pretty amazing, because you can build a big set of information that you want to know about a project, about a hobby that you're interested in, about goals that you have around a fitness plan. You can build all that stuff out and simply ask questions of the document as you want. And more to the point, you can go out on the web and pull down all kinds of different PDFs and just interrogate those without having to read the whole thing. It's extremely powerful. It does struggle sometimes with images that are embedded in PDFs. So at the end of the day, when you upload a PDF, just be sure that you understand it's really going to just pull from the text that's embedded within it. But it's pretty good at it, and it's really strong in terms of just making things more effective. So let me take this pet thing, and I'll show you that functionality one more time, just because it is so cool. I'm going to go ahead and drop that response about pets right in here. Paste. Okay. So I've got some notes about pets in here. They're not in any particular order. And now let me save this as a PDF. And I'm going, I want to do that one. Okay, yep. Sorry, I'm logged in on a couple of different networks right now. Let's go to a new thread. And let's go ahead and grab our Copilot again. And we're going to upload our actual trip planner, which, doggone it, got to load it, got to save it again. I want you guys to see this live. And I always like doing these things live just so it's entertaining when I mess up. But you can also just see some of the things you need to think about as you go through. Okay, so we've got this document up here. And the night before the trip, we have a question about pets. So we've uploaded that document. What are guidelines for pets on my trip as expressed in this document? Okay, I'll put 4 there. You could just skip that. It'll mine the entire document. But you can see that it's going in and it's actually grabbing what was in that document that I just put in there, okay? So again, stepping back, this is not just about the wilderness. This is about building really robust sources of information that you could continually update even and pull from. So if you're a coder, there might be a particularly long string of code that you wanted to analyze. You can upload this document and ask it to look for errors, or to ask it for suggestions on how to rebuild or to initiate more coding around it. Like I said, you can build a fitness plan. There's a lot of different kinds of stuff you can do. It's just getting in there and starting to play with the tool, because there's so much functionality and things that you're going to discover along the way. Let me go back to my pitch here. So we reviewed PDFs, showed you that. And I showed you how to update and analyze your trip planner. But basically, I want you guys to have a good trip. If you're going out there, you can certainly use this. And just remember, the things we talked about today apply to all kinds of situations. Again, you can make these tools part of your AI world or your world around learning languages, about just understanding how things work, about analyzing data. There's a really cool focus feature in there that I'll show in a couple of weeks around math and how you use Wolfram to do math more accurately. And you certainly can use it for writing and editing. Before you send that email, if you want feedback, you can paste it into these tools and it'll give you that kind of feedback. But the best way to learn is just to get started. Log on to Perplexity and just start playing with it. You will not break it. You're not going to make anybody upset. It's there for you to use as a sandbox and just play in. And if you ever struggle with what you're supposed to do or how to best use these tools, just ask the tools themselves. They're pretty good at just walking you through this. So I want to check my time here because I went over last time. I think I'm 10:40 exactly. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. But I want to say thanks to the American Center in Moscow. Gang, that's all I have on my side. If we want to open this up for questions, I'm more than happy to take them. And it looks like we've got a question. What kind of mapping and navigation tools does Perplexity AI integrate with to assist users during their wilderness adventures? So let me put that up there real quick, because I think last time some of these questions were kind of dense. Okay, so question 1. All right, what kind of mapping and navigation tools does Perplexity AI integrate to assist users during their wilderness adventures? Really, it's going to use 2 different things. It's going to use the internet, and it's going to go out, and based on the fact that we told it it was an expert camper, it's going to access information around mapping and navigation tools that we could use. But it's also going to pull from its big training database, okay? And we can always ask the question itself of the tool. So I'll go into Perplexity. I'll hit a new thread. Let's just submit the question right here and see what it says. Kind of curious to see what it says. So I can pick GPS, map, navigation, satellite imagery. Doesn't necessarily have which particular tools that it's using, but you certainly can validate it as you build out these trips. And it's just going to be pulling from the corpus of online stuff. So it's going to be pulling from Google Maps, TomTom, really anything that's been set in there. When they train these things, quite frankly, with the exception of things like textbooks and private communication between companies and people, if it's not one of those 2 things, it's probably in this training database. So it's got an immense amount of information that it can pull from to respond. And then Perplexity makes it even better by integrating in with the internet. Question 2. Ooh, that's a great one. So this question was, are there any privacy concerns or data security measures in place when using Perplexity AI for trip planning in remote areas? So first off, yes, it's secure, okay? Some of these tools use the interactions you have with it to train the model, okay? Perplexity does not do that, so you can be comfortable that you're using this in an environment that is safe. I set up a Gmail account that's tagged to my name. So I don't have any privacy concerns whatsoever. With some of these tools, you do need to be aware of that, but not for Perplexity. And it's also important to remember that when you're using things like just the writing tool, you're completely reliant on what's in the training data. Okay, so you always want to validate the outputs and everything else to make sure it's correct. Question 3. That's a good one. It's kind of fun. We'll just have Perplexity answer some of these. So how does Perplexity AI handle real-time updates or changes in weather, trail conditions, or wildlife patterns while users are on their trips? Let's ask it. And the net of it is that I would never use one of these AI tools for situational, in the moment kind of concerns. There's a presumption that you have cell phone access, that kind of thing. If you do, that's great. You don't always up in the boundary waters. So I definitely didn't want to use this as a tool where a bear is running at you and you have to figure out what to do. But it can handle a lot of changes. All right. So the fact that it's accessing the internet about things like conditions, trail conditions, all you have to do is simply ask it what's happening in the boundary waters today, or what's happening in Corellia. Has there been any things reported as a trail outage or flooding or anything else? So again, it's going to connect to all of the internet using a very smart tool that's going out and looking at your context to find the appropriate answer for you. Now, again, disclaimer, don't rely on any one technology tool when you're out there camping. At the end of the day, you probably still need to know how to build a fire if you don't have a cell phone connection. But Perplexity AI is going to be just as real time as anywhere else on the internet, with the exception of some of the social media sites like Twitter, where they might enter in a post that hasn't necessarily been cached yet on the internet. Let's see, question 4. All right. It's a good question. You guys really want to use this tool when a bear's running at you. So what are the limitations and challenges of using AI in the wild, and how does Perplexity AI address these issues? And again, I could answer these questions. I think it's more interesting to have Perplexity do it. No idea. Well, I'll just put skip. So it'll give you reasons. There's always the chance that there could be incomplete or biased training data. Okay, so if it didn't know a lot about the boundary waters, and it does, there's been a lot written about it. There's been a lot written about Corellia. It might give you incorrect information. Now, Perplexity mitigates that by making sure that it's checking sources on the internet. Okay. Lack of context sensitivity. All right. And that's why I talk about using a role, an objective, context, and an example with these tools, okay, to give them a better sense of context. Now, obviously, there's going to be, this didn't get as wilderness-centric as we wanted it to. But as long as you have access to the internet, this tool will act the same way. If you're able to download the phone app for your phone, you basically, the cool thing about Perplexity in terms of getting around that notion of connectivity is, again, we could build this entire document with different information we want to pull from on our trip. And we've always got that as a reference point just on our phones or whatever sort of device that you might be using to store that kind of data. Let's see. All right, I'm going to put this one up here because this is kind of a more general question. Real quick. And where are we at on time? 10:47. Okay. Can you provide insights into the future development or advancements in AI technology that might further enhance planning a wilderness trip using tools like Perplexity AI? Yes. And the answer is that nobody has a complete idea of where all this stuff is going. Now, there are a couple of things that will always be changing and are changing right now. Increased functionality and Perplexity. And one of the key things there, and I'm really excited for it to come out, is going to be what's called multimodal. And this will probably be the coolest thing about a camping trip because it will be able to digest pictures. You'll be able to input pictures. It'll be able to understand what's going on in them. Let's say that we took a picture of a leaf. We want to know what kind of leaf it was. Multimodal is coming in a few months, I think pretty much across the board for all these tools. And that's another complement. It'll also be able to use audio. In a few weeks, I'll show you how you can use a tool called Pi and just talk to it. It'll talk right back. So kind of picture a world, if you want to go really far off in the future, where everybody's got a little webcam right here on their glasses or whatever else they're using for it. Sorry, my phone's going off. So picture a world where you've got that camera, it's identifying everything that you're seeing. That kind of world is not too far away, okay? Just take what you see with those new Apple Vision goggles. That's going to be the way people interact with their environments going forward. So multimodal will be a big step forward in that direction. Another thing that's coming, I hope not tomorrow, but is coming, is artificial general intelligence, AGI. That's probably going to happen right now. They say between 2 and 3 years. For perspective, if you had asked that question last year, they would have said 20 or 30 years. It's decelerated that much. But AGI is probably going to start showing up in some of the future releases of both the GPT tools as well as some of those Google models that are coming out. And this basically is a state where these tools can do everything at least as well as the smartest human being in that particular field. Okay, so why these tools are powerful now, AGI is an entirely different thing that's coming. It simply is kind of unavoidable with the technology curve and everything else. This will raise profound questions for society. I talked a little bit about those last time, but AGI will probably make us better at planning camping trips too. But for right now, for the person that asked that question, just remember that multimodal thing. It's going to be super cool to be able to snap a picture, upload it, and have it identify what's in that picture. All right. And there are a few tools out there like that do that now. Let me see if I got all the questions. Question 6. All right. That's a good one. Let's ask Perplexity that one. Get off of Chat GPT here. What types of data sources does Perplexity AI use to provide recommendations for a trip, and how accurate are they? That's a great question. Okay, so the first thing that Perplexity AI is going to use is its training data. Okay, and again, it's been trained on just about everything that is publicly accessible. It just really is that broad. But the cool thing about Perplexity is that it's also connected to the internet. So it's going to go out there and confirm that its training data is correct. Perplexity is really good at not hallucinating, where these tools just get kind of wiggy and go off on a tangent. Okay. It uses both its training data as well as the internet. But let's see what it says too. I'll turn off that Copilot. So, and here's a list. Should have just had the machine answer. It did a better job than I did. It's going to pull geographic data from like the USGS. It's also going to pull in user preferences. And since we've got a minute, I'll show you that. If you set up a Perplexity AI account, you'll be able to enter in a profile about yourself. It knows my name. I don't put in much more than that because it will bias how it responds to stuff. But I could put, I'm Woody, I'm interested in camping and only camping, right? It'll ask you where it's located or where you're located. But when you update this profile, it'll literally ask you, hey, you want me to write a story about you? So that's kind of fun. But what you can do, though, once you update that profile, it looks at it every time you ask Perplexity a question and tries to make it more focused and specific for you. So again, if you were a coder, you might enter things in here like, I'm a software engineer. I'm extremely interested in Curl and Python, you know, some of the key languages within the AI space, at least Python is, or LangChain or different things like that. You could update all that within your profile, and it will give you responses that are more geared not only to your question, but also your own context. Okay, so that's a really cool way that it pulls information. Let's see, 1053. I'm going to laugh. Some of these questions are AI generated. That means you guys are getting it here. So what precautions and safety measures should adventurers take when relying on AI tools like Perplexity for trip planning? Okay, well, let's ask it. It's interesting that it pulled avian flu for some reason. Okay, so don't rely solely on these tools. You probably already figured that out. Okay, verify your information that these tools are spitting out. And again, the nice thing about Perplexity is that it will pull sources for you. And then the standards, be prepared for unexpected limitations. But it also talks about the limitations of these tools. Never rely on these things for real-time information. That's where you want to find or ask the tool to find you a dedicated texting service that the wildlife department might use to manage and talk to people within the park. But then it's got basics about, make sure even if you use these tools, tell somebody where you're going. And then just some other statements in there. But what are the limitations of AI tools like Perplexity in remote areas? I'm sure it'll say something about connectivity. The biggest thing to remember with these tools is these are not human beings, at least not yet. Okay. But they lack our intuition. And we get around that intuition thing by giving it a very informed prompt. We give it a role, be an expert camper. We give it an objective. I need help thinking through my camping trip. We give it context about specific things we want. And then we just give it a task to do. And in this case, we had it generate a 5-day trip planner. Let's see if we got any. Oh my goodness, that is a tough one. For these tools that are just a few months old. Can you explain some real-world examples of how AI has improved wilderness trip planning and safety through tools like Perplexity AI? Well, first off, we generated some of those things, okay? So today we generated that trip planner, and that's probably something that saved us a good couple of hours of just framing up where we want to go, how we want to spend our time, and what are things to think about, okay? And we could have made that more and more robust with a general prompt or the more specific prompt. But let me ask Perplexity what it thinks. It's a good question because these tools are just a couple months old. But it will tell you things like you can use this for route planning and navigation. One of these things that these tools could do is that if you knew the pace that you wanted to hike at or the pace that you paddled, you could use Wolfram, the little math thing, to help you figure out whether or not that itinerary really allows you time to breathe. We certainly saw how it could automate trip planning. In the future, I would expect it to do things like compare pricing and buy sleeping bags on your behalf if you wanted to do that. Really, these things are going to become more autonomous agents where you give them an objective and they go out and fulfill it. AI does have some real-time navigation capabilities, but I wouldn't plan on that. Oh, how about this? I did not know this. AI-based planning tools. Adventure Genie is an AI-based travel planning tool that offers and this is probably a very specific United States application, but yes, you will see more and more tools. Think about your favorite tool that you have right now that you use as an app. I'm trying to think of a good example here. But at the end of the day, I would expect most apps that you get, whether or not it's a travel planning or fitness or whatever else, are going to have AI integrated in it. So you don't have to go through FAQ sections or help sections. You can just go ahead and enter in a question and the AI will return that response. Last question. That's a good one. We're going to get to the end of this and you're going to find out that I don't go camping much. I fish a lot, but I don't go camping much. Have you personally used AI tools to plan a wilderness trip? Yes, I have. You just watch me do it. So these tools, again, Perplexity didn't exist before January. Generative AI as a concept really just started getting momentum when ChatGPT got released in November. So if I was going to go on a wilderness trip between last November and now, I would have used it. I certainly would use it going forward. I just literally haven't had the chance to yet. We haven't gone up north to do much canoeing lately. All right, I think that was the final question. I'll go ahead and close out. Again, I want to thank everybody. Please come back in a few weeks if you want to join us again. Even if the topic isn't something that resonates with you, we'll be talking about general tools and techniques to use with these AI tools, and they'll all be different, okay? So we'll kind of hit different topics as we go through. So please join me again. I think we're at the top of the hour, but I hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and thanks again, American Center in Moscow. Bye. Bye-bye.